Good afternoon, Ray. Here we are in Martinborough, Wairarapa, and with the Extinction Rebellion Election Roadshow. And you're here to talk to us a bit about the climate and ecological crisis. Please put us in the picture of you. Who are you? And so that we can get to know you a little bit.
Right. My name is Ray Lilley. I'm an olive grower. We have 600 olive trees. They produce some lovely oil too, because of the climate. Nothing I do will help that. Although I try to help the climate in whatever way I can. We've lived here had the property for 20 years. I've lived here for the last 10. Before that I was a journalist, working internationally for the Associated Press, and Agence France Presse. And I also worked as with Radio New Zealand. I was editor-in-chief for some years with Radio New Zealand. Yeah, so that's the background.
Yeah, thank you. So you've mentioned the climate. It's a good climate here, good for olives.
Last year we picked one particular variety which is called Koroniki. It's a very small olive, it's Greek origin. And when we had it assayed by the lab, it had a polyphenol readings of 650. We've never had polyphenol readings of that height before. In fact, I understand there's only one other New Zealand reading which is higher, from Banks Peninsula near Christchurch. That's because of the climate. That's because of the hot, dry summer that we had. And the trees struggled quite a lot with the dryness of the season. But by the time we got to pick them in the early winter, they were in amazingly good condition. And that was the result. Polyphenols are the things which are the best for your health.
Right.
The higher the reading, the more healthy the oil.
Right. But you're saying it was an unusually dry summer?
Yeah, very dry summer. It'll be similar this year according to the forecasts. That lack of rain, while it might be good for some production, is not very good for others. For example, the sheep farmers, the crop farmers, the wine growers use a lot of water. They use something like 6 litres per vine per day. They must have very easy access to water to make sure they've got a crop that's worth putting into the barrels.
Right.
But it's a very difficult climate at times.
Right. So you have some knowledge about the climate and ecological crisis and the way it's affecting things here for you and for others?
Yes, it's slowly coming through. I mean, who wants to walk their dog on the riverbank when it's full of potential poisons caused by the qualities of the water? And that's the problem we have here. You know, one of our biggest rivers, the Ruamahanga, about a mile to the down the road. You can't swim your dog in it in the summer because of the level of toxins in the water. And if they eat those toxins, they die. Now, I mean, if that's not part of an ecological crisis, I don't know what is.
Right.
And how many people want to swim in water of that quality? You go and look at the river and think, lovely swimming, and then you realise that the toxins in it are probably quite dangerous.
Right.
Quite dangerous.
And you're talking about crop farmers needing, and grape farmers needing water, and we're heading to another very dry summer, and we're being told the temperatures are being broken, the records are being broken year after year this century. Yeah, well,
today, for example, Napier was having 21 degrees.
Yes.
In September. I can't imagine how high that will go in December, January, February. And right through the country, when you listen to the regional forecasts, the numbers are just amazing. You know, you have a frost first thing in the morning, by 2 o'clock in the afternoon it's 18 degrees. There's a fundamental change going on that people in many ways aren't recognising or don't want to pay attention to. And I think that's the same throughout the whole of the climate crisis. It's so large a concept that people just can't find a way to understand it, to process the information, to get to the point where they know and will admit that it's a crisis, not just a change in the climate.
So where, I'm sure you've got some ideas of what should be done. Like we've just had a COVID crisis, we're still in a COVID crisis, where the government has taken the lead. And here we are with the climate and ecological crisis. What do you think could be happening to address this crisis?
Well, I think what many people are saying internationally is that we need to have a reset, not just of production from the farms and from the land, but also a reset of the whole process of production from industry as well. And so we begin to use fewer of the resources on what is a very limited planet. And that's not beginning to come through in people's discussion at all. And unless we begin to limit our use of some of these vital elements in the environment, they're going to disappear and not be available.
Right.
And the same with the land. If we don't stop just dumping chemicals on it to drag production from it, and instead begin to look at it in the regenerative farming way, for regenerative agriculture, looking at rebuilding the soil, stopping the use of chemicals, stopping the mass use of water, but in fact plants in such a way that the water is retained by the soil, plant in such a way that the soil is actually grown in quantity, the topsoil in particular, and it's that sort of approach to farming occurs. And there are some farmers, even here in the Wairarapa, doing this sort of work now, but too few of them. Most of them are merely putting more cattle and more sheep on the land to produce more production without a thought for what's going to reverse it. Right.
So if this was government-led, it might happen at the rate that we need it.
Well, government-led yesterday the government suggested we'll put $50 million into the pot to help farming begin to restructure some of its production. 50 million? They just spent 14 billion on wages to keep people in work. 50 million's not even going to get half a dozen bureaucrats out the door to do anything with it.
Right, yeah. So one of the things that we talk about in XR is we've known this. The science has been clear for decades. We've known what we should do for decades, and we haven't done it. It's like our democracy has been hijacked. I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts about what we can do about our democracy.
Prince Charles, remarkably, I'm not a monarchist, but Prince Charles keeps saying remarkably sensible things. And of course, the politicians keep ignoring him because he's not supposed to have a view on such matters as the environment and the ecology and how to prevent the disaster that's confronting us. And I don't know how we break that cycle. Equally, in some parts of Europe, for example France, Ireland and even England, they're now beginning to set up what are called citizens' assemblies. Those citizens' assemblies are actually chosen groups of people who come together from a variety of strands of thought and sit down and work through problems like the climate crisis, and come up with ideas which even the politicians are actually now beginning to look at seriously. Macron, for example, the president of France, has just had the French Citizens' Assembly report directly to him, partly to bypass the political process, so he can actually get an independent view of what this Citizens' Assembly is proposing. Now that sort of development I think is marvellous. That sort of development is what New Zealand needs to do. And it probably could do it regionally, so that region by region, with the different issues that come up in each of the regions. For example, the Wairarapa is quite distinct from Wellington, or from Hawke's Bay, or from Auckland. But if Wairarapa had its own Citizens' Assembly, looking at the issues that confront us in terms of climate in particular, I think quite a lot of more progress would be made. Quite a lot more of those views would then seep out into the community. At the present time, so many people are so bothered by things like COVID that climate isn't even on the radar.
Thank you so much for your insights, for your local knowledge and your breadth of knowledge. I'm just wondering, as we come towards the end of this interview, whether there's anything more you would like to add.
I've been trying to do a small local experiment at home. Over the past 6 months, I decided one day that all the plastic that comes into the house is much greater than the amount of plastic that came in as single-use plastic bags, for example. So it comes in toothpaste tubes, in cleaner bottles, in all sorts of food bottles and food containers, and all sorts of other products come in plastic. So I started putting them all aside and saying, how many of these am I going to be able to recycle? How many are 1 and 2? And how many are not? Well, it turns out I took 100 of them today as a sample. 3/4 of them were 3 and above, non-recyclable. I virtually see a tsunami of plastic coming into the economy, coming into the household, which is non-recyclable. It's of no earthly use. There's nowhere for it to go but the landfill. And I think that's just appalling, seeing it's 3/4 of the plastic that's coming into the household. Now, to be fair, 1 or 2 producers actually do provide 1s and 2 plastic recyclable containers. But the great majority of them are using the lowest cost product, and that's 3s to 7s, and are completely unable to be recycled. So, thank you. I'm glad you heard that. The reality is that with the plastic bag single-use removal, we're not even scratching the surface of the danger that plastics are actually going to be causing in the next 30 to 50 years.
Wow, I had no idea, and but I have heard that as fuel consumption is dropping, that the oil industry is looking at plastics to keep their profits up.
Yes, that's
and so
exactly
here
right.
you are having an example of that.
And those plastics are just going to make it all so much more difficult. And the science is now showing that the ocean is filling itself with plastic as a consequence of our misuse.
Yeah. So again, thank you for your time, your insights, your breadth of knowledge. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.